Hello, welcome to our podcast. Today we are going to be talking about how different theories relate to manipulation and deception issues in online communication and online relationships. Your hosts today are going to be Lauren Pellegrino, Amanda Parker Silk, Hayden Zepp, and Haley Pointer. Hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, my name is Haley Pointer, and today I'll be discussing interpersonal deception theory and how it's represented through manipulation and deception issues in online communication. Interpersonal deception theory was first introduced in 1996 by David B. Buller and Judy K. Burgoon, and aims to explain why and how people deceive others and the strategies that deceivers use. Additionally, it also analyzes how listeners recognize deception and the impact that this recognition has on the relationship between the speaker and the listener. According to slide 5 of the PowerPoint presentation Interpersonal Deception Theory, Buller and Burgoon, 1996, by Patrick McIlerney, the three strategies of deception that speakers can use are falsification, concealment, and equivocation. Falsification, or creating a fake story, and concealment, or preventing the discovery of the truth, are commonly witnessed in many forms of online communication. For example, an online influencer on Instagram or TikTok can tell their audience that they like using a product in order to advertise it for a company that they have a brand deal with, but if the influencer doesn't actually like the product, then they're using the falsification method to deceive their audience. This could be done in an attempt to get their audience to buy from that brand. Another example could be someone using the concealment method who might never mention their poor socioeconomic background to their richer friends in an online chat room to prevent themselves from being judged or outcast by their peers. Deceit and manipulation can have similar outcomes, since they both tend to have negative impacts on the relationship between speaker and listener. An important aspect of interpersonal deception theory is that it addresses the fact that deception and manipulation can occur in any relationship at any level. In fact, according to the YouTube video David Buller on interpersonal deception theory from the channel A First Look at Communication Theory, research suggests that those who are in close interpersonal relationships are not any more likely to detect deception from the other members of their relationship than those who are in fragile interpersonal relationships. A concept from the textbook Interpersonal Communication, Everyday Encounters, 9th edition, that ties into interpersonal deception theory is attribution, which, according to page 89 of the textbook, is a person's justification as to why something is happening or why others are behaving in particular ways. According to the YouTube video, people in strong interpersonal relationships tend to place great trust in the others in their relationship, and when they become suspicious of others, they often attempt to find attributions for others' behavior besides deception. Another concept from the textbook that supports this theory is empathy, which, according to page 95 of the textbook, means to share the same feelings as another during a particular circumstance. Manipulation and deception online is especially harmful when it's used to deceive empathetic individuals, or those who try to relate with others through their emotions. For example, someone can use a fundraising site such as GoFundMe to deceive others into thinking they're sick and need money for medical treatments, and the people most likely to donate to the deceiver are those who are sympathetic to their fake ailments, or who have experienced the same ailments themselves and need an emotional feel an emotional connection to the person they're donating to. A third concept from the textbook is found on page 79, which is perception, which is the process of establishing meaning through the use of selecting, organizing, and interpreting data. Perception is an important factor of deception, since listeners understand and uncover deception through the use of perception. An example of perception would be during a video call with a friend, a person might use their perception to notice nonverbal cues, including facial expressions such as avoidance of eye contact or lip biting, that they can use to indicate that their friend is lying to them. We'll now move on to Amanda, who will be discussing relational dialectics theory.
Hey, so I'm Amanda, and I'll be exploring the communication issue of manipulation and deception in online communication and relationships, particularly through the perspective of relational dialectics theory, or RDT. Relational dialectics theory, developed by Leslie Baxter and Barbara Montgomery, explains that relationships aren't linear or static, but they're shaped by tensions between two conflicting groups. These contradictions are not a sign of a dysfunctional relationship, but they are natural aspects of every relationship that people must continuously navigate. So there are three main dialectical tensions in relational dialects theory. There's openness versus closeness, which is the desire to be transparent versus the need to withhold information. Autonomy versus connection, the need for personal independence versus the need for closeness. And lastly, predictability versus novelty, which is the comfort of routine versus the excitement of change or spontaneity. Now, when it comes to online communication, these tensions become more amplified and often more difficult to manage, especially when deception and manipulation are involved. So let's start with openness versus closeness. Whether it's well known or not, online platforms often encourage users to present an idealized or edited version of themselves. While some people want to convey authenticity online, they may also want to withhold details or distort the truth to protect themselves, or just to even control how others perceive them. In manipulative cases, this dialect is often exploited. Someone might deliberately hide key parts of their identity or create a completely false persona while encouraging the other person to be vulnerable and open. This imbalance creates a false sense of intimacy and emotional manipulation. Next is autonomy versus connection. So in healthy relationships, both partners negotiate how much closeness they want and how much independence that they need. But in online deception, one person may foster emotional closeness while keeping themselves detached emotionally or even geographically. And this lets the manipulator maintain control while the other person becomes increasingly dependent and completely unaware of the imbalance between the two. So finally, we have predictability versus novelty. And so in online interactions, especially those involving manipulation, unpredictability can be used as a tool. So the manipulator may shift their tone, disappear suddenly, or change stories to keep the other person uncertain. This creates an emotional roller coaster that destabilizes the relationship and increases the victim's emotional investment through confusion and genuine hope for consistency. What's important to recognize here with all that information is that relational dialects theory can actually help make sense of the emotional and communicative tensions that are often present in deceptive online relationships. So these tensions, while they're natural in face-to-face settings, become extremely skewed and more damaging online due to the lack of, physical presence, body language, and real-time feedback and criticism. RDT also emphasizes that relationships are co-constructed through dialogue, but when deception is present, that dialogue becomes one-sided. The manipulator often controls the narrative, leaving the other person negotiating contradictions without realizing the other side isn't playing honestly. Understanding RDT will kind of lay a framework to critically examine these dynamics and helps identify when natural relational tensions become manipulated and when communication moves from being negotiation to control. Some recommendations for approaching this problem, you can again apply some perspectives from RDT to promote healthier online interactions. A couple that come to mind is education is key, teaching people how to recognize these dialectical tensions like openness versus closeness can really help them spot when a relationship lacks that mutual transparency, especially in an online relationship. Second, boundary coordination. I think that's pretty crucial. Establishing mutual expectations earlier on in the relationship. For example, how often to communicate, what topics are off limits, or how personal the information can be shared, helps prevent one-sided control. Third, mental health and communication resources. I think those should be made accessible, offering guidance on setting boundaries, navigating relational uncertainty online. And finally, just encouraging open conversation about anything, emotional autonomy, digital consent. It can really help people rethink how they approach closeness and trust in those kind of virtual spaces. But yeah, I think that by understanding and applying these concepts of RDT, people, individuals, communities, they can all become more resilient to online deception and building relationships that are grounded in mutual respect and actual authentic dialogue. Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to talk about social identity theory and how that relates to online communication for manipulation and deception. So first, we're going to outline social identity theory. Basically, this theory discusses how your sense of self is based on your group membership in society. It is who you feel that you are, where your identity is found, and your place in society. These groups can be a couple different things. They can be inherent, or you can join a group. So some examples of this would be race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, family, religion, hobbies, or schooling. Anything like that could be considered your group membership. So this is a way to enhance your image of yourself. So it's a way for individuals to feel included or to have a place in society. It can also give individuals purpose or a sense of belonging. Within this theory, there's also two groups. You have your in-group and your out-group. Your in-group is anyone who is in the group that you identify with. So those that you feel closest to or are in the same groups as you. And the out-group is anyone outside of that group. So anyone not a part of your group. This creates a very black and white us versus them mentality. And it can also change based on your place in society. So my out-group might be different than your out-group. All right, so now let's hop into online communication. First, we're going to start with manipulation. So this theory can kind of discuss online communication for manipulation in multiple ways. So first, we're going to talk about manipulation of individuals. People can pose as part of the in-group. This can allow for information to be transferred between people who are not necessarily in the same in-group. It can also cause bullying issues online as well as spreading false information, and that's exactly what want to avoid as in-group members. Next, we also have manipulation of someone's identity. Someone could use an online persona to appear more attractive, more knowledgeable in a certain area, any of the above, really. And an example of this is dating through dating sites or apps, and catfishing someone to going on a date with them when you're pretending to be somebody that you're not. And then lastly, for manipulation, we have conformity. So this can look like someone who is also in the same in-group as you, and their willingness to engage in behaviors might be different because they're being manipulated by people in the online in-groups. They may want to fit in or seem cool, which could then lead to dangerous behaviors from that individual. Next, we're going to go into deception within online communication. So we do have our out-group bias. You could falsify information, which can then cause confusion within the in-group. Which again is not the best in the social identity theory, simply because your whole identity is based on your in-group. So if there's information being shared that's not true, that could really cause someone some issues personally. There's also a lot of anonymity online, so you can hide your identity. There's also reduced accountability, and people tend to want to do behaviors they wouldn't be comfortable with in person just because there's no identity, if a small identity. So it's easier to get away with these devious or morally incorrect behaviors. And then lastly, there's a lot of reduced social cues online. So it's harder to detect deception. You don't have any body language or eye contact or facial expressions with the exception of video calls. But it's much harder to communicate and determine whether you're being deceived or manipulated online simply because you don't have that face-to-face in-person interaction.
Let's begin with conflict theory. At its core, conflict theory is about power struggles. It focuses on how different groups or individuals fight over control for resources, whether that's financial, political, or even cultural power. In the context of the workplace, it often shows up as a battle between executives and employees. Executives, often at the top of the organizational hierarchy, hold significant power. They make the big decisions about policies, company direction, salaries, and sometimes even the workplace culture itself. But employees who might not have the same power or resources have their own interests, needs, and concerns. And when their voices aren't heard, conflict arises. This leads to employee resistance. Workers may not always have a formal platform to express their grievances, but that doesn't mean they stay silent. Whether through petitions, walkouts, or even social media posts, employees find ways to resist decisions they feel are unfair. These actions can seem as a form of communication expressing dissatisfaction with the current system. Now, here's where communication becomes a tool of power. Consider memos, HR policies, and even official emails. On the surface, these might seem like simple pieces of information, but they often serve as instruments of control. These documents set the rules, structures, and boundaries within the workplace. They can dictate everything from work hours to how employees are expected to behave or perform. However, employee resistance can take on more suitable forms too. Workers often find alternative ways to communicate dissatisfaction, whether through informal meetings or private conversations. These informal channels are often where employees voice their concerns and plan collective actions. While they might not be official, they are important forms of communication in the power struggle. Now, let's switch gears and talk about standpoint theory. This theory, developed by scholars like Sandra Harding, looks at how knowledge is shaped by people's social positions and their lived experiences. In other words, the way we see the world is deeply influenced by where we stand in society. This becomes especially important in the workplace, where there is often a disconnect between executives and employees. Standpoint theory suggests that those who are in positions of power, like executives, often have a limited view of the world. Their decisions are shaped by their own experiences, which can be far removed from the daily realities of their employees. Let's take a look at some examples, considering caregivers, disabled employees, or women in leadership roles. These groups face very different challenges compared to the male able-bodied counterparts in higher management. The executives who may not understand the nuances of these challenges often make decisions that don't take these perspectives into account. This leads to a disconnect between those at the top and those at the bottom of the corporate ladder. Executives might make sweeping decisions about benefits, work hours, or health policies without considering how those decisions affect their employees' daily lives. And that's where the tension begins. Here's a key question for standpoint theory. Whose voices are included in decision making? And perhaps more importantly, whose perspectives are ignored? Employees, especially those who from marginalized groups, may be excluded from these discussions, which leads to decisions that don't align with the real needs of the workforce. To really address workplace conflict, it's crucial that organizations listen to the voices of all employees, by including perspective from across the spectrum, especially from those who are often overlooked. Executives can make more informed and fair decisions that reflect the diverse experiences of their workforce. So, let's wrap up both conflict theory and standpoint theory. Provide valuable insights into how power, communication, and perspective shape the dynamics of the workplace. Conflict theory shows how power struggles manifest in communication, with executives using formal channels to maintain control, while employees push back through informal means. Standpoint theory, on the other hand, reminds us that knowledge and decisions are influenced by one's social position. Executives may be making decisions without fully understanding the lived experiences of their employees. To really address conflict in the workplace, it's important to consider both theories. Organizations must recognize the power dynamics at play and ensure that decision-making is inclusive, taking into account the perspectives of all employees. Only then they can begin to bridge the gap between executives and workers, creating a more equitable and productive environment for everybody.